All right, here we are again. This is the fourth talk I'm giving in this one on metaphysics um, and perception. Um, in the first one of this series, I talked about how Berkeley, the philosopher, 18th century philosopher, said that we only perceive our own ideas, and that's kind of common sense. We only experience our own experience. We don't experience anything outside of our brain, if you want, or our mind. We're kind of locked into ourselves. And that's just sort of like one of the facts of life. And it conforms with contemporary neurology because everything is mediated by your nerves and brain. You don't experience anything directly. You experience your nervous system. And by way of that, you get an interpretation or a representation of the outer world. And because you don't experience the outer world directly, well, it opens up a lot of skeptical problems, like how do we know that the world outside of us is like our experience that apparently occurs in our brain or in our mind. And so from that, you get all kinds of strange ideas, like the movie The Matrix, where it's not. Like what's going on in our mind in The Matrix is plugged in and it's coming from a computer. It's a simulated reality. And that keeps Neo prisoner until he gets woken up and shown the actual world, which ironically looks pretty much just like the simulation of it that he had been taking to be the real world. And that's kind of like how people think. Okay, in our contemporary neurology, we basically do sort of think that there are, in a way, two worlds: this internal one, and the external or outer world. And contemporary books about philosophy of mind will constantly refer to the outer world. And the outer world, the world we can't directly perceive, but we have to use philosophy to wonder about and how it produces our internal experience. That term, outer world, has been around since Aristotle for 2,500 years. It's very old. So there's nothing new about this. Now, what this is called, this idea of there's a world out there that I can't directly perceive, but I infer it from my internal representations, that's called representationalism. And you can see why. Experience is not direct, it's a representation. Now, what's a representation? Well, an example is a painting is a representation of a person. When you watch television, that's a representation of what's going on in the movie studio once, maybe a long time ago, somewhere far away, but your TV gives you a representation of it. When you pick up your cell phone or your iPhone, you hear their voice, but you don't hear it directly. You hear a representation that the phone is producing. And there's a lot of mediation that goes in perception. Not only do we not directly perceive objects, but we actually perceive a representation of something that is itself a representation. So I'll give you an example. When I look out, let's say, like I said earlier, there's a fire engine out in my driveway because there's a fire in the apartment building, and it's red, and and I see that out there. Well, really, the red of the fire engine, according to modern physics and neurology, is really what's causing my experience of the red is really a frequency of light, which is electromagnetic radiation. And that frequency, that light, those light waves, they hit my eyes, the outside of my eyes. They don't go into my brain. They stop there. But there are sensors in my eyes, and there's color cones and stuff, and they convert these different wave patterns into another signal, which is my body produces its own language to convey the patterns in that light. And that's an electrical signal, and it moves down my optic nerve. And that doesn't come from outside from me, it comes from my body itself produces it. And then that reaches the part of my brain where the color emerges, and I perceive the red fire engine. But notice that the red that I experience isn't just a representation of the fire engine, it's a representation of an electrical signal in my optic nerve, which in turn is a representation of a light signal, a light radiation frequency of electromagnetic radiation outside of me. And so it's kind of like, and same with when I get my phone call, when my daughter talks to her iPhone, well, vibrations are in the air to her phone, but then her phone takes those vibrations and it converts them into electrical signal, a little like the signal that goes down the optic nerve. And it goes down, well, no longer down a cord, it goes to about, I don't know how cell phones work, to a satellite or a station, tower. And then eventually that reaches me, it's converted back into a sound wave so that it can travel through the air from the phone to my ear, then again converted to a electrical signal which at the point of my eardrum, and it picks up the wiggling of the eardrum and it converts that to an electrical signal. That goes to the place in the brain where that's turned back into the experience of sound. Isn't that amazing? So we are at least a couple of stages removed from the actual source of our experience. And this is according to theories that we have, and we have ways to test these. So the idea that I experienced, so let me get to this point. So there's this representationalism has this problem that we don't know if the world is like we experience it. We don't even know if there is one, but we look for alternative theories besides the idea that there is some physical fire engine out there causing my experience. But this really bugs some people. And so what they do, and this has always been true, there have been people, and they're smart people, and they hate this. They think that it just doesn't conform to common sense. It really feels like when I look out my window at the fire engine in the yard, I feel like I'm looking at the real fire engine. This whole thing is just way too complicated. And so these people are called direct realists, okay? So they feel they're having the experience directly, not mediated all the ways I just described. And they feel that they know how the fire engine is and looks because they see it directly without mediation. And these people are also, besides direct realists, they're called naive realists. Because in order to believe that, although they have sophisticated arguments that they make to try to make this claim, and it's been around a long time, very, very famous people have argued for it, although it's not the mainstream view, it never has been. But there are people who get very hostile about it. They find it incredibly naive and stupid. But I know that some of my listeners might find it appealing, okay? And that's going to be interesting, what we're going to come to when we get to the end of this, because I got a twist here. So what I say is he's naive because he has to just ignore a whole set of evidence that things are mediated, and that things are not only always how they appear, but very likely are not as they appear. I could come up with so many examples, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give some examples. First of all, the people who are direct realists get annoyed because the first argument people give is what's called the argument from illusion. And I'll give you an example of the argument from illusion. You can get a false sense of the quality of something, depending on conditions. So I want to give some examples of that. Let's say I'm in a warm, toasty cabin by the fire, and I have a cup of soup. and I'm holding it, and I'm very warm. In fact, I'm a little hot by the fireplace, and so this feels sort of cool to lukewarm. This bowl to me, it's been cooling off for a while. But then the door bursts open and snow swirls into the cabin, and this guy slams the door, and he's got a big bear fur coat. And he sits down, and he says, "Let me have some of that soup." And I hand him the soup, and he's come in from it's 40 below, and we're in Siberia. And he takes the bowl, and it feels very warm to him because his hands are so cold. He has to kind of touch it slowly because it almost burns his hands, even though it's basically almost just above room temperature. So I experience it as cool, and he experiences it as very warm. So which is it? Which one has the correct, direct experience of the feeling of the bowl of soup? Obviously, they both do, but you have to consider the conditions, other conditions, other factors. So another example is called, God, I hope I can remember what it's called. I can't. Okay, so let's say I'm at a racetrack, and the car's coming toward me in the race, and I'm in the audience. I'm in the bleachers, but I'm on the front row. And as they're coming toward me, they sound like this, their engine. But then, as soon as they pass me, they have a pitch that sounds like this. And it sounds kind of like this if you put it all together. Well, which is the correct sound of the engine? And if I go over to the pit stop and I hear the engine, the guy revs his engine, it's somewhere in the middle. So what happens is, because the car is moving toward me, the sound waves are compressed, and they are received as compressed because he's constantly moving forward. So they're leaving the car at a faster, more frequently, because he's sort of covering the ground that he's just that the sound has just moved. And so they're tighter together, and so we hear them as higher pitched. And as he's driving away, it sort of stretches out those waves effectively, or apparently from my point of view. And so the pitch is lower. Okay. The same thing happens when I look through a telescope at a star. If the star is moving away, because the same thing happens with light. If the star is moving away from me, we say that it has a redshift, because the waves of light are more compressed, and therefore looks red. But if the star is moving, I might have this all backwards. Well, whatever it is, if the star is moving away from me, it's red. If it's moving toward me, it has a blue shift. Okay, so it looks more blue. It's exactly the same as the thing with the car. So those are some examples where just how it appears to you is not a good judgment, a way to determine the facts about the car. And so I'm not sure you could get out, a thermometer for the bowl of soup, and you could get out, recording equipment for the sound, but no, it is different. Because we're talking about your perception. Your perception is different according to the conditions. So those are physical variables that change, that mix up the idea that we just see things as they are, and we have direct experience of things as they are. That's how you know the qualities of things, because all you got to do is look. Well, it's not quite like that. It's not quite like that. So now another thing is those are physical, but there's also psychological reasons that you experience different things and make different judgments, very different judgments than other people. And this is called, in psychology, it's called Gestalt psychology. You see, when you hear a soprano sing a beautiful song, you know, the facts are that it's just a series of notes, But that's not how you experience it if you're a lover of classical music. You hear something really beautiful because that song that she sings is more than the sum of its parts. And that's called Gestalt. And that is the Gestalt quality. The Gestalt psychology recognizes that we organize our experience and we perceive more than the just sum of the parts. When I turn and I look at the fire engine, I don't just see some red, some black, some coldness, some a particular length. I see a fire engine. How is that possible? Because I organize it into the experience of a fire engine through the idea of a fire engine. If a pig looked out the window, he wouldn't see a fire engine. He'd just see more something like the parts. Maybe he would see something yummy to eat. I don't know. I'm not a pig. And by the way, that's yet another way that we can see that just declaring oneself to have an objective with the right perceptions, and you know how things are because you looked. Well, there's something called an Umwelt. And this is what was pointed out by Jacob Uexküll that I almost mentioned a couple of talks ago at the end. Uexküll pointed out that has this theory, there's a lot of evidence for it, that all species in nature have a different way that they see, and things show up differently. Like we all know that bees see things an unusual way, and flies and dogs see things in black and white, and each one of these animals has a different Umwelt. So things show up very different for each animal. So which animal is right? Well, I guess the naive realist would say, well, you've got to compare it to, my experience. Well, that becomes the problem for the naive realist. He overcomes his epistemological concerns about how things really are simply by ignoring them, really, or setting down his conclusions as axioms. And this is actually a true thing that they do, which is not really what an axiom is. An axiom is laid down as a possible truth, and then you can have internal arguments that work with the axiom. But anybody can just say, well, I don't accept that axiom. I'm going to put a different axiom in. It's kind of like modeling it with computers. So that doesn't prove anything, these axioms they try to create, like an axiom, things are this way and that, because... So anyway, they presuppose the objectivity of their own personal perspective. Now, obviously, that's actually kind of a contradiction in what I just said. They see their perspective as objective, that's the naive part. And this is a kind of mind blindness, or lack of being able to conceive from the other person's point of view. You're sort of locked into assuming you're right. And why are you right? Well, because you're you, and you're a very important person. And if somebody feels that I have been unfair, they can say so in the comments, because this isn't an area that I got to study much, naive realism, because I was told it was wrong when I studied philosophy. And anybody who even presented an idea that smacked of it got shouted down as kind of a dope. And these things would be gone over. And I could go on. But the first... Oh my God, there's so many philosophers have seen this difference. The arguments why you can't assume that a thing is like it feels or how it appears. That appearance is not the final criteria for determining a fact about the outer world. Now I want to say what is good about naive realism, and where naive realists are onto something that is very important. And there's truth in what they're saying. And I just talked about this in my second book, and I'm going to try to talk about it now. I've never have in a video before. It's going to be a little difficult. But, This manner of thinking, this naive realism or direct realism, the idea that when I look at the fire engine, well, that's the fire engine. I'm seeing it directly, not a representation. I see the actual fire engine. What are you talking about? There's what's true. It's been called common sense metaphysics. Now, the reason it's called common sense is it just feels like common sense. And this is, there's truth to the fact that that feels like common sense. It feels right. It's intuitive. It's not counterintuitive. The idea that the world that you perceive and live your whole life in, like I talked about how I go to the toaster and I make toast and I'm living in the world of my experience, not some theoretical second world. That's my world. And it's just one world, and I live in it. All this is intuitive. It conforms with our natural intuitions. I have a natural intuition that I am holding my actual pen here. And if you tell me that I'm not holding the actual pen, there's another pen in another world that I can't see and nobody can see and will never be able to see it, that's counterintuitive. That does not sound normal. And they say that naive realism is the position that philosophers really take when they knock off after work and go home. Because that's the world they live in. We all live in the world that this is a cup, it's my cup, this is the actual cup. I didn't get the wrong cup. There's not another cup. It's not just a sign of a cup or a representation of a cup or a copy of a cup or some qualia. This is a cup and it's the cup and there's another one. Okay, I'll tell you why I think that is. In my system, the evolution of perception, that's where you wind up. You wind up where, because I don't have, in the evolution of perception, a second outer world, I have the world of perception is the only world that there is. There's not another one. There's not even, yeah, really. At least it's the only physical world. And this cup that I experience, my perception, and as it appears, is the actual real cup. In that, there's not another one. It's like one. Let's say I have a son and he's got a toy gun, and I've got a real gun. It's kind of like that. It's like this is the actual thing, and then everything else is trying to be a copy of. If you want to do a painting or a movie or dance about it, this is the real archetype, this cup. Because in the evolution of perception, there is an evolution. Now I got to do this right, because if you're looking at this, that's on your left. So I'm going from left to right. I wish I had my paper here. Well, maybe I can do this with this. Well, I'm going to draw this so you understand the concept I'm trying to make. Remember that the evolution of perception is a process. And the process has a beginning, a start, and it has an end. And in the process, things end up differently than when they began. And that's where we avoid the historical fallacy when we understand that we should not project the final part onto its cause, because there's a process, like an evolution. And this evolution of perception starts in a state of immateriality, which is just perception itself, and that evolves the appearance of matter. So matter is in the outcome of the process. Matter, or what we take to be the properties that we mean when we say the word matter, they arise out of this process. And so this material cup is the final outcome, and all the things around it in this fully evolved perceptual reality, or perceptual dimension that we live in. And therefore, it is material, I could say. It's made of stuff. It's made of plastic. Plastic is made of atoms. And atoms have substance too. But all that substance is something that supervenes and arises out of the process. A process of what? A process of evolving perception. So therefore, we don't have to have this dichotomy of worlds. The evolution of perception is not a two-world view. It's a one-world view. And it is not a system of representationalism. My experience of this cup is the result of a long evolution of perception. It is not some kind of representation of some other cup. So isn't that funny? And yet, why isn't my system, the evolution of perception, naive, like naive realism? Because whereas naive realism has to just sort of bracket out and not think about all those psychological things that occur, like Gestalt psychology and so forth. And there's others that I didn't list because it would have gone on a little long. There's all kinds of ways in which our bodies and our psychology affect what we wind up seeing. But in the evolution of perception, we don't have to avoid those. Though it is this psychology that's what we're looking for. We're looking at the ways that are the ways we look at things and our nervous systems and stuff alter what we see. That's the part that evolves. Because remember, we evolved these forms from more primitive forms and so forth, and they arise out of number, natural laws, and so forth. And so I don't have to deny any of the physics. I don't have to deny any of the psychology. The psychology is an important part of the explanation, a part of the process. That's what produces this. Part of this experience of a cup that the audience is having with me right now is because they too are able to see more than the sum of its parts. You don't just see some geometry and a couple of borders between this and its background and some green. You see a cup. That means that you are using your Gestalt psychology to see more than the sum of its parts. And that isn't explained in naive realism. It's not naive. Now, that's the best I can do right now. I've never tried to explain this on a video before. It is in my book. I'm pretty sure it's clear. But that's all I have to say for this. And now we've covered naive realism. All right, take it easy. Bye-bye.